Hey everybody, this is Brinna.
And this is Kirsten.
And we are Writing in Cars with
Theo Students.
We're driving around and discussing our thoughts on the Bible, and we have a lot of them.
Pop culture,
political climates,
racial issues,
gender topics,
and more.
Sometimes we'll have special guests with us, but always caffeine.
We are students at Drew Theological School.
Join us for conversations along the ride. We are discussing 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 and 7 through 9 today. And basically our feelings are like, excuse me, what? So this talks about gender issues and relations and things like that, which we have a lot of thoughts and feelings about, so send your thoughts and prayers. But also, angels be trippy. So in verse 6 of chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, it says that a woman's hair should be cut off to deter sexual attraction from angels. Excuse me, what?
Excuse me, what?
And then in verse 10, it says a woman needs a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels, which just like seems like it's randomly thrown in the text. But if you like read about it, it's to avoid the lust of angels participating and assisting in worship.
Excuse me, what?
As always, we are reading out of the Jewish Annotated New Testament. It is an NRSV translation. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 and 7 through 9. Christ is the head of every man, and the husband is the head of his wife, and God is the head of Christ. For a man ought to not have his head veiled, since he is the image and reflection of God. But woman is the reflection of man. Indeed, man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for the sake of woman, but the woman for the sake of man.
Excuse me, what?
So that's a thing.
So that happens. This is from one of the fairly undisputed claims that Paul wrote this text, is the authorship of it.
According to a commentary, he was trying to repair the factionalism among the people in Corinth. So he had gone there, and it was mostly Gentile church, and he realized that there were a lot of issues in this trade city. And so he was like, I'm going to try to deal with all of these divisions. So he starts writing about the Holy Spirit, marital and sexual norms, relations with the Gentile world, worship practices, women's roles, and resurrection. Super light topics. Except, like, did he handle them right?
We have our opinions about it. I have my opinions about it. But I always try to keep in mind that, like, these stories and these letters and narratives in the Bible were written for a reason. And they're not always understood by us. However, I mean,
Excuse me, what?
So, as much as like this letter and a lot of Paul's writings that we'll get to in a little while, just caused me some pause.
So to take it back, there are some claims that Paul was referencing Genesis in different parts of this, specifically in the second creation story. So to take it to Genesis 2, verses 21 to 23, it's whenever it's written that a woman was taken or created from man after a rib was taken from Adam. And there's a note in the Jewish Study Bible of the NRSV, Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, that says the creation of woman after the man and from a part of his body need not imply the subordination of women to men. So also, if we're taking that, if it was a hierarchy in the order of creation, wouldn't animals be above humans? In which case, excuse me, what?
So Paul's taken some creative freedom here and has picked the creation story that works best for his motive.
In which case, you do you, Paul, but like a disclaimer might have been helpful.
Right. In one creation story, woman is created from man's rib. But in the other, they're created at the same time. So it's completely valid that they're both in there. It took me a little while to get that, but they're in there. And I think it's important that we raise up that if you're going to cite one of the creation stories, there should be like an asterisk in his letter, like a footnote in his letter, or postscript. This is referencing the second. I came across in our airman textbook the airmen talking about Paul's letters and Paul's stances on women and their inclusion and their equality or lack thereof with men, their place in the church, their role in the church, and I've always been a little skeptical of Paul, but it gave me pause again. So it talks a little bit about Galatians, and I believe it's Galatians 3.
Yes, it says that Paul's writing contradicts himself. So Galatians, which is another undisputed letter of Paul, in that book, chapter 3, verses 27 through 28, it says, "There is no longer Jew or Greek, there is no longer slave or free, there is no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus."
So it seems that, in a way, if these are two undisputed Paul writings,
was there a change of heart?
Was there a change of heart?
Did he intend to contradict himself?
Right. Was there?
Are we misunderstanding something?
Right.
There was a positive thing that was mentioned, that because Paul does talk about women, it means that in the church, men and women alike were praying and prophesying already. So hopefully,
a glimmer of hope.
So I have this book called Jesus Feminist by the author Sarah Bessey. I love it and I love her, and
Great.
she helped to reframe some of my thoughts on Paul. I still have a lot of questions and I don't fully know where I am on everything, but such is life. So Sarah writes, "When women are restricted from the service of God in any capacity, the church is mistakenly allowing an imperfect, male-dominated ancient culture to drive our understanding and practice of Christ's redeeming work." So I don't think that it's difficult, as two people in theological school who happen to be female, that we have experienced cases in which people have either directly or indirectly spoken against women in church leadership of any capacity, whether in pastoral ministry or in leadership of other types. I was just thinking recently about how some friends have been supportive, and they like send texts and say like, "Thinking of you, praying for you," but at the same time they wouldn't ever consider going to a church that has a female pastor, and that breaks my heart as their friend and as a Christian in general, and specifically as a female who is going into some sort of Christian leadership.
So I actually have been really blessed with #blessed with great church leadership growing up, where women's voices and women's equal participation in the work of the church and the leadership of the church has been uplifted and supported, and the pastors of my home church that I've had growing up, male, female, have just been incredibly supportive of everyone in the church, and also my sense of calling into ministry of some sort. Who knows what that's going to be.
Same.
So I've always had the sense of support in that. Now that I'm in seminary and and for a little while working in a church in this context, I've seen a little bit of this at work through laity in the church I was working at, leadership of the church I was working at, kind of taking my views on things kind of with a grain of salt, like, oh. And this is actually twofold, not just being a woman, but also my age as well. There was a conversation that me and the pastor had about kind of the life of the church, and he mentioned that there are some members of the congregation that just won't respond well to me, that their patriarchy is strong, and no matter what the issue is, no matter who of us is there, they will go to him instead of me. And this was not just men, this was women as well. And I was like, excuse me, women. So I think that that took me a little while to be like, all right, I didn't agree with it, but I also couldn't dispute who they felt more comfortable going to. At least not then. I couldn't. So that's kind of how I've seen it play out. But it's weird, and it doesn't feel good, like in that setting, being in that position.
It feels almost like a personal attack.
Right. And this goes along with so many different issues in the church that you are being judged or put lower for something that you have no control over, for the most part. So yeah, it doesn't feel good. So smash the patriarchy.
The denomination that I was raised in does ordain women, and I'm really glad that I was able to see women modeled in leadership in the church, but it certainly wasn't equal. And it's not that it was anything stated that women weren't equal, but that there were not anywhere near an equal number of women who were ordained or in the church hierarchy, which I really don't like to use that as a term, but we know that it exists and we just deal with it. And so it was kind of this struggle seeing that these things were verbally being affirmed but not visually being seen. To put it in a different perspective, I looked at a seminary from that denomination, and most, if not all, of the professors were middle-aged white men, which happens a lot in the church, but it was disappointing to see that directly at a seminary from that denomination, because it goes against what is being spoken. And I know that this isn't the only case where that happens, but it's difficult to see that blatantly being chosen when there are certainly opportunities to have a diverse faculty at seminaries and theological schools, as ours wonderfully does.
Way to go, Drew. Way to go.
You did it, Drew. Theo.
Another fun fact to know and share.
Those are my favorite.
When I was working in the church, I don't know, because I don't fit the other categories, but I found myself as a woman being... people were trying to set me up on dates with their sons or their grandsons or their nephews. And I said, excuse me,
Hashtag crossing boundaries.
I felt like my singleness and my womanness was being kind of exploited in a way. And a lot of assumptions were being made in that moment, in those moments. So just another, like, piece of this puzzle that was really interesting. I don't know if it's the female inequality piece, so that would be an interesting thing to continue talking about and learning.
We are certainly self-aware, or at least try to be, of what we bring to social situations. So we are both white, heterosexual, single females, and we know we're awesome, but that doesn't mean you have to suck someone. We're good. As always, we are going to close with our ending statement. I used to think blank, but now I know blank.
So I used to think that the Bible is the Bible, and what it says is the end all be all.
Like the gospel truth.
Right.
Or Hercules.
But what I think now, and what I know now, is that these stories were written in time and a place, and they have a purpose. And while they do have relevance to us and power for us, we need to pay attention to how they can be harmful in some ways, and in a way think about how they might be written differently these days, and in our current context and society.
There's a professor who was giving a community lecture recently, and he said bad theology is harmful, which is certainly true, but the fact that he just specifically said it seems very applicable here. I used to think that it was just a thing that we said, that women were fully equal, but now that I've seen it modeled so many times over the past few years, especially having a female pastor for 5 years, it's been really great. And so I know that we can't take things literally in the Bible so many times, just because bad theology is harmful.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.